дээрэд эхэлдэ шүү. Яг зүгээр хүмүүстэй юу яг үднэс. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Fernanda. How are you?
Good night.
So the chairman of today's session is Professor Turtaktoch. I think he's online already. Turu, are you there? Professor Mascarenhas, ahoy. Түрүү эхлүүлчихлээ. Professor Turtaktoch had some network issue, but he's back in. So I think we can start soon. Turo, can you hear me?
Yeah, but I can't. Anyone on the screen? So everybody here?
Oh yeah, I can see you now.
Their connection is unstable.
Одоо зүгээр нөө. Turo одоо эхлэх зүгээр хоо. I think we are good to start.
Yeah. So good morning back. Good day, good afternoon. Scholars and other participants. I'm Turtaktoch Janer, the chairman of the department.
Oh my gosh!
The second day of International Virtual Conference on Democratic Challenges in Asia and Mongolia, co-hosted by the Center for Deliberative Democracy at Stanford University and Asia Foundation. Thank you all for joining this academic venue. The first our joint conference themed Deliberative Democracy in Asia was organized in 2018 in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, and has made deliberative concepts and mechanisms as one of tools to explore and innovate Mongolia's democratic development. The conference of this time is being held during one of the most challenging times of human society, which is fundamentally changing the traditional context. Moreover, it may have a unique way of surviving to shape the recovery with more distinguished guests, opening remarks by moderators of today's session has many of distinguished guests, including Dr. His Excellency Mr. Ambassador Michael Kretchen, Mongolia, Dr. Fernanda Casal-Bertois, the University of Nottingham, Dr. Nick Open Society Forum, University of Education, one of Associate Professor Paul Mascarenhas, sorry for bad pronouncing, a Vice Dean for Science and Doctors in Art, Young Evangelista, a moderator, Dr. Nils Hegewisch, Director of Herbert Stegel, moderator of the second panel, Mr. Gerald Sahan, Research Fellow, Mrs. Ortnason, Research Fellow, Center for Democracy Studies, National University of Dr. Hatam, Head and Legal Studies, Institute of Philosophy, Mongolia Academy of Sciences, Social Professor Hishinian, Lecturer Dolching, Lecturer Tikshpoyang, the Department of Education and Psychology, National University of Mongolia, and Dr. Bomdar and Lecturer Badamdash, Department of Political Science, National University of Mongolia. The Foundation for funding organizing this conference on behalf of the Department of Political Science and Center for Democracy, National Mongolia. And special thanks to all of our guest speakers and participants at the event. I hope all participants join the vote to make this conference a successful one. So now I invite our honorable guest, Dr. Mungtsik, member of National Parliament, State Great Khural of Mongolia, to give her welcome speech.
Hello, are you hearing me? Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see all my friends and colleagues. So today is very special day. A new Prime Minister of Mongolia will announce his cabinet members today, just after the 1 hour. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for famous scholars, including Larry Diamond and James Fishkin and Mr. Ambassador Michael Kletchensky, and a former member of Parliament, Mrs. Ondra, and distinguished speakers for attending this conference. It's particular interest that this conference is taking place at the moment of challenges of global pandemic COVID-19. Moreover, presidential election will be held in Mongolia 5 months later. Also, the 100th anniversary of Mongolian People's Party is coming in 2 months. The conference is very important to look again at present achievements of Mongolian democratization and also discuss challenges in the future. Therefore, as member of parliament and as a political scientist, I would like to express my position, political party reform, a brief connection, Mongolian constitutional amendments. In recent years, in Mongolia and all the global tendencies emerging that authoritarian tendency and populism and nationalism and increasing. Especially in us as Mongolia, it's a very specific show that public opinion polls. Also, I would like to say that in some people of Mongolia is very expect populist as the authoritarian rules. For example, survey findings conducted in Mongolia show that there is formidable support for strong male leadership and also the presidential system among Mongolians. Under this circumstance, the constitutional amendments approved in November 2019 were able to consolidate parliamentary system, bear long-term positive result for democratic consolidation in Mongolia. Since the party system is very important for democratic consolidation, it is impossible to consider the democratic results without accounting political parties. However, the citizens' trust in political parties are declining according to public opinion poll, especially in young voters in Mongolia. And therefore, important steps were made in constitutional amendments in furtherance the more sophistication of political party activities and financing. The Article 19 of the Constitution states that the citizens more than 1% of the electoral age population can assemble and form political party which will implement national level policies and whose internal organization shall be computable for democratic principles. And also the sources and spending political finances shall be open to public. Following this amendment in the Constitution, the Parliament must pass revised laws of political parties and new law of political financing. It's appropriate to increase the public funding of political parties, not only to those with the seats in parliament, but also the other important ones outside parliament with significant voter support. Also, we must establish political foundation by the party as a think tank. Also, it is important to provide the spending percentage for public funding of parties for certain purpose. For example, there's political education of party members and supporters, and also the policy researches. We need to formulate policies, and also one critical issue is we need to encourage gender equality. And therefore, we need to public funding to expand. Also, if we can make these changes into the party system, this will have great contribution in Mongolian democratic consolidation. Thank you very much for attention, and we're successful and fruitful discussion for the conference.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mungtsik. She's my classmate.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I would like to invite Mr. Ambassador Michael Krechesky, the U.S. Embassy in Mongolia.
So thanks to everybody who's here today, speakers in the Shatar, members of parliament, distinguished guests, presenters, academics, and everybody else. I am really pleased to join all of you at this virtual conference today on such an important subject. The last year, 2020, was obviously an important year for democracy in both of our countries, in the United States and Mongolia. The successful completion of free and fair elections is always something to be celebrated, and maybe even more so during a global pandemic. So congratulations, first of all, to all of those who helped plan and execute elections in both our countries during this really challenging time. It's important that we always acknowledge our successes, even as we consider the challenges and the areas for growth that also are present in democracies. As we think about the historic transition of power just completed in my country, which culminated in President Biden's inauguration last week, let us remember that democracy is a system that can and must grow and thrive, even as our societies and the challenges they face are evolving. A major strength of democracy, as opposed to, say, authoritarian forms of government, is that our systems are self-correcting, thanks in part to those feedback loops of which elections and a free press are key elements. But that growth requires investment, effort, and care. And I see today's proceedings as just that, an investment in democracy. The ideas you discuss and refine through this exchange have the potential, will contribute to the next stage of democratic development in Mongolia, in Asia, and indeed throughout the world. Looking through the agenda, I'm really confident that the great quality of speakers from both Mongolia and abroad will yield meaningful discourse over these 2 days. And I'm especially pleased to see the high level of participation from Stanford University, an institution that has shown so much interest in Mongolia over the years and truly showcases some of the finest researchers and thinkers and educators that America has to offer. The shared commitment of our two countries to democracy is a major component of our flourishing strategic partnership. As part of that partnership, the United States has made a range of commitments to support Mongolia's development. One major focus has been reinvigorating the presence of the United States Agency for International Development, AID, as we all know it, in Mongolia. USAID's renewed presence is already leading to significant commitments to support various areas: growth of small and medium enterprises, strengthening of the disaster resilience of communities, boosting Mongolia's COVID-19 response, and of course, advancing democracy and good governance. The U.S. government is really pleased to support this conference through USAID's strengthening women and youth engagement in electoral and political processes in Mongolia. It's a mouthful, it's pronounced SWEEPM as a project, which is implemented in cooperation with the Consortium for Elections and Political Processes Strengthening, the International Republican Institute, IRI, and the Asia Foundation. This project is working with Mongolian civil society, academics, alumni of U.S. universities and exchanges, and government to inspire more young people to learn about and engage with the political processes that can have a direct impact on their lives. In addition, USAID is supporting nonpartisan efforts to make sure that political participation in all its forms becomes more inclusive. This is a goal we know is shared by the Mongolian government. However, progress towards such goals as, for example, increasing the number of women in leadership positions or supporting more persons with disabilities to vote requires sustained investment, often over extended periods of time. And we're really proud to contribute to those efforts, and we will remain committed to supporting democratic practices in Mongolia. So let me just conclude by sending best wishes for all the participants and observers who will be attending today. My sincere thanks to the Department of Political Science of the National University of Mongolia, a fantastic partner for us, for organizing what will, I'm sure, be a thoughtful, productive exchange. Me, I'm looking forward very much to attending as much of this as I can, and I'm sure I will learn a tremendous amount from this impressive group of participants. Thank you. Good luck to all of us. Okay, so I was asked to just say a few more words. As you can tell, that was videotaped because I didn't actually think I could make it this morning's session. which is why I'm dressed differently than in the video. But I just wanted to, first of all, congratulate everybody in yesterday's conference and say that it was really fantastic. What I liked particularly about it, because I managed to stay for most of it, was that it was very practical. It wasn't only theoretical, although there was a lot of interesting theory as well and analysis of the democratic situation. I thought it was very practical because it addressed ideas for how to improve democracy, both in Mongolia and really throughout the world at a time of great challenge. But I also wanted to stress that one of the things I liked best about it was that it brought international experience and international best practices, suggested it to Mongolia. And that's something that our embassy is always trying to do. That's why we're so pleased that we have USAID back in business here and functioning with at full bore, and we're very, very happy about that. So I'm looking forward again to seeing how international experience can be applied again to Mongolia in today's session. So thank you very, very much to the organizers, and best of luck to all of us. Mashik Bardla, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Okay, now I'm shifting the mic to a moderator. That's me. Okay, so let me begin the speaker session. And so today's panel 3 topic is Mongolia's evolving electoral system and its impact on democracy. And we have 4 presentations. So please keep the time, all the speakers, and 15 minutes for paper presentation and 8 minutes for question and answers. And the first presenter is Dr. Fernando Casal-Bertois from the University of Nottingham. And his paper topic is public funding of political parties. What is it good for? Okay, Fernando, you have 15 minutes, so I'll keep you remind by the last 1 minute, okay?
Okay, very good. You're seeing the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so good morning, Mongolia. Good night, Nottingham. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you to share some of the, knowledge that I have acquired on the topic, working for, different organizations, International IDEA and OSCE ODIHR especially. So I would like to start my presentation with a metaphor. There is this idea that there is no money, and there is no politics. And, my colleague from Birmingham, from the university, Tim Houghton, says that money is the fuel for the engines of party politics. Fuel does not determine which car is faster or who will win the race, but certainly high-speed cars need plenty of fuel, and vehicles need access to refueling stations during a long race. It is clear that we cannot really have party politics without money. That's why the issue of public funding is so important. Unfortunately, public funding has been considered to be guilty of many problems, far from the 10 plagues of Egypt, but still has been considered to be negative, for example, in terms of public trust. Some scholars practitioners have mentioned that public funding decreases trust in political parties. Others have said that it is public funding that really increases corruption. The idea that these politicians having so much money not to know where they are wasting it. And of course there are even those who say that public funding fosters patronage, party patronage. The fact is that based on these ideas, there have been important attempts at elimination of, party funding. We can mention especially the one in Italy, which was successful under the proposal of the populist party Movimento 5 Stelle, five-star movement. There were also attempts at eliminating, party funding in Poland and in Bulgaria through, two referendums. In both, the idea of eliminating party funding was, positive. However, it was not finally eliminated because of the lack of quorum and therefore, the mandatory character of those referenda. However, the question is this really true? Are populist politicians right? Are certain journalists, right, thinking that, party funding is more a curse than a blessing? Well, when we look at, what scholars have, investigated and researched, we see that, party funding has many positive effects. One of the first effects that has been again and again shown in different studies is that, party funding helps to increase the level of party system institutionalization. It does so because it reduces the level of fragmentation in a political party system. It helps to increase the predictability in the patterns of inter-party competition, so the way political parties interact at the time of government formation, and also decrease electoral volatility, making, voters' preference more stable over time. And this has been shown in many different regions. Myself, I had an article in Sociological Methods and Research where I look at the relationship between party finance and party system institutionalization in Eastern Europe. A colleague of mine from the University of Lisbon have shown the same positive effect in Africa. And, Broom also in her study in 2017 shows, as you can see, a clear positive correlation between, public finance and party system institutionalization. But public funding not only helps to institutionalize the system as a whole, it also helps to institutionalize political parties, party institutionalization. However, it's important that we take into consideration that it does not necessarily affect the two dimensions of party institutionalization equally. If we look at the work of Levitsky, we can distinguish two dimensions of party institutionalization: rudeness, or the social rudeness of political parties, and routinization of the strength and stability of the organization. In a study that was published in the Journal of Politics in 2018 by Nicole Bolliger and Saskia Ruth, looking at Latin American party systems, they found that public funding certainly helps to strengthen the organization of political parties, but does not necessarily help to stabilize the rudeness, social rudeness of political parties. Therefore, does not help certain political parties to win more or less voters and supporters, which, by the way, makes total sense. Nicole Bolliger, also in her excellent book published in Oxford University Press, showed that public funding helped to boost new political parties and help them to survive. But once again, she found that does not guarantee that they will be successful in elections, which makes sense given that, as many academics and practitioners have shown, the importance of public funding is to create this playing level field among all political parties. In terms of party survival, and taking from an article that I published in Party Politics in 2019, we see here in Eastern Europe, post-communist countries that certainly have, important implications for the Mongolian case. We see that in all those countries that introduce in later stages public funding, the percentage of parties that survive that were publicly funded was always higher than those political parties that were not. And what is interesting is not only that public funding increased the level of survival of political parties in those systems, the importance is also that it helped those political parties that were not in parliament, but still were getting public finance, what I call the parties between thresholds, the electoral threshold and the payout threshold. With one exception, Romania. In all the other post-communist countries, the level of survival of those parties that were publicly funded was higher than those that they were not, certainly pointing to the positive effect of public finance in terms of the institutionalization of political parties. And this is very interesting because by introducing public finance and making it extensive to extra parliamentary parties, we can kill three birds with one stone. On the one hand, we guarantee the survival of political parties and therefore helping for the stability of the party system as a whole. We also, of course, increase, representation, which is also very important. So in a way, we manage somehow, to bring together the famous trade-off between stability and representation. And believe it or not, we also decrease the level of extremism in a party system. And this is because, while private money tends to, finance in many cases, extreme political parties, let's think, for example, the role of oligarchs in countries like Ukraine, Moldova, or Georgia. The truth is that in these countries, Ukraine, especially Moldova, public finance was just introduced 2 or 3 years ago. Public finance helps to moderate the views of political parties and voters. Why? Because taking into consideration that the median voter is where political parties will get more electoral success, and they tend to be in the middle of the political spectrum, we shouldn't forget that the majority of the systems give finance on the basis of the percentage of votes. So it incentivizes the move of political parties towards the center, not only for the sake of votes, but also in order to get more funding. In fact, in an article that is currently under review, and I write with my colleague from Spain, Jose Rama, we clearly see that party finance, public finance, decrease the level of polarization and the level of support for anti-establishment parties. You can see it here that looks at all post-communist countries, how making the payout threshold, therefore making public finance more accessible to political parties, reduces the level of support and the electoral success of extremist, anti-systemic, populist, anti-establishment parties. So once again, a very important effect, positive effect of public finance. Costa-Lobo and Rossuoli, using the data that was collected by Susan Scaro and colleagues in their project on party organizations, also show that public finance, contrary to the cartel theory of Katz-Mer, increases party responsiveness, making voters happier with the way political parties adopt their policies and programs. And this is shown, here I show a graph at the country level, but they also show it at the party level. Another very, very important effect is that of reducing corruption. As we know from Transparency International survey of 2013, political parties are considered to be one of the most, if not the most, in all those countries that you see here in red, corrupted institutions in a country. That's why it is so important that public finance help the reduction of corruption. In a study that was recently published in the British Journal of Political Science, Hummel and co-authors showed that public finance reduced the level of corruption. International IDEA has also shown how electoral campaign finance manages to also reduce corruption in many countries, and especially in more developed, party systems in Europe and Latin America. However, it is important to take into consideration not everything is a panacea. In fact, like in the Goldilocks story, low finance might be bad, but a lot of public finance might also be bad. In an article that I published with colleagues from the University of Leiden in 2014 in the International Political Science Review, we show how too much dependency on state finance and restriction of finance to only parliamentary parties does not have the effect of reduction corruption, meaning that it is this aura mediocritas that would really allow for the reduction of corruption. So to somehow recapitulate and take into consideration all the different positive effects that I have shown you that come from academic studies in the literature. I would like, based on the study that I was the author and was published by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, to recommend the following changes to public funding in Mongolia. The first one is that certainly it is important that the amount of public finance will be increased, perhaps introducing a system of matching funds that will help to establish a kind of balance between private and public funding, conditioning also the reception of public funds on the reception of private donations. The second thing is that state subsidies should be certainly available for extreme parliamentary parties. This is very important. As we saw, it can help us to solve many problems that sometimes are considered to be a trade-off. Perhaps relevant parties, those that have at least 2% of the vote, but still are not members of parliament. It is also important that instead of allocating the public funding on the basis of the percentage of seats, the allocation should be taken into consideration on the percentage of votes, which will be much more fair than the current system. It was mentioned at the beginning the importance of promoting the participation of women, especially in a country like Mongolia, which does not occupy a very high place in the world in terms of the ranking of participation of women, neither in parliament nor in government. I think that it would be essential that we earmark a percentage, perhaps 20% of the public funding, so political parties use it for the promotion of participation of women, and perhaps another 10% for the training of politicians and future leaders. And finally, I think this is essential. It has been proven very effective in many countries, Portugal and others. The loss of public funding should be made an important sanction, even conditioning, for example, the perception of public funds to this promotion and the respect of gender quotas. But also, and I would like to end with this, we shouldn't forget, public funding is positive. Public funding might help to reduce corruption, increase responsiveness, institutionalize political parties, institutionalize the party system. But without a proper implementation of an overall system, and especially the establishment of an oversight system with a proper independent oversight authority that has proper resources, human and financial, everything that I have said will not really work. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Fernando. Wow, the keeping time is excellent. So now I'm gonna receive the questions from the floor, and if you have one, please raise your hand. Dr. Muchzik, please go ahead. Yeah. Please unmute your microphone, Mogi.
Okay, you hear me?
It's okay. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando, for your presentation. I have agreed all your proposals and all your principles. We need to discuss our political parties law for your recommendation. I would like to note that Dr. Fernando works as a consultant for Mongolian political parties law last 2 years or 3 years. Also, we need to discuss our political parties' financial. I think so that we need to expand public funding, and also we need to provide much fund is also necessary for Mongolian political parties. Therefore, but in Mongolia, the trust of political parties is very low, especially in young voters. For this circumstance, if we have passed political parties law by expanding public funding, there must be some protest and criticize from public opinion. Therefore, we need support for all our scholars and as NGOs. We support this public funding and some new regulation for public funding financing. Yeah, let's together to work this political parties law. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Dr. Mukhtzek. So would you agree with that, Fernando?
Well, I mean, certainly. I mean, I could not agree more. I mean, the thing is that, I mean, I think that, we have a responsibility to educate the public. The public does not really, know and understand about, the benefits of public finance, right? And I think that, in this sense, it is essential, as you know, I direct the Research Center for the Study of Parties and Democracy, represent here in Nottingham, that tries to bring together both practitioners and academics in order to really study, not only, the ambassador was making, reference before at the importance of bringing together, the theory and the practice, and try to understand that, it's not that we are sitting academics in this ivory tower, but, trying to really, apply the things and the analysis that we do. And I think that, in this sense, it is essential that we all come together and try to educate the public, because unfortunately, they are not having the information and the knowledge to understand how essential, public funding is, especially in a country where, as you know well, pledge money, is one of the, main problems. This is something that, for example, in the report that I wrote, for International IDEA 2 years ago, we mentioned, public funding would be able to help this problem. And, I think that the public would certainly understand that, pledge money is a problem. Mongolians know about it and Mongolians criticize it, even if it's a clear practice. We all know about this. Maybe in the next presentation, it will be also mentioned, I don't know. But public funding will be able to compensate for, this problem. Another thing, it would be also easier to sell the introduction of a higher level of public finance by increasing the powers or a creation, if necessary, of a powerful oversight authority. I think that, the public would understand that, in compensation for giving political parties, more money, a proper authority that allows for reduction of corruption, would be created. I think, that we have to find creative ways in order to, try to sell this idea, which, as I've shown, is good to the public.
Okay, thank you. Political parties here in Mongolia has been going on its right way, how to gain the power. Okay, so any question more? You can raise your hand or push the button of the mark. I cannot see any. Bashka, can you see any? Okay,
Mr. Diamond.
Professor Blair Diamond. Yeah.
Thank you. So if I could just ask Fernando, who has a great article coming out in the Journal of Democracy, by the way, is party, well, two questions. Is party system stability a good thing? And or always a good thing, or a superior value? And how do we maybe say a little bit more, guard against the cynicism people have about political parties as self-serving entities? Isn't there a backlash against, I mean, I'm sympathetic to your argument, so I'm trying to play devil's advocate, by citizens who say, this is just self-serving for parties to give themselves money from the public treasury?
Okay, Fernando.
Okay, yes, I was just, noting. So nice to meet you, Professor Diamond. It's a real pleasure. Thanks for, having me in your journal. The article is having a lot of publicity, so, very happy about that. Regarding your questions, party system stability is a good thing. Well, I mentioned Goldilocks, right? And I think that with party system stability, we can say the same. Party system instability is a bad thing. There is no doubt about it. Party system stability is a good thing. Over party system stability or party system over institutionalization is not necessarily a bad thing. So, I have a forthcoming book in Oxford University Press with Scholten Jedi, where we look at this issue and the consequence of party system institutionalization for the consolidation and the quality of democracy, topics that, as you are expert on. And, we found out, interestingly, that, for example, party system institutionalization is a sufficient condition for the survival of democracy, while party system institutionalization, once you control for economic development, does not have an effect on the quality of democracy. And in some countries, especially the post-communist countries, too much institutionalization is certainly bad for the quality of democracy. If we think about, for example, countries like Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, Hungary itself, but even if we go a bit into Southern Europe, let's think of my own country, Spain, Greece, Portugal, quite institutionalized, at least until very recently, party systems. But as we know, the levels of corruption, low levels of accountability are very high. So I would say that, like everything in life, we need to reach a proper, medium, right? But too much is not good. Still, too much is better than too little. This is one thing I would like to say. And regarding the other question, well, there is the issue of who control the controllers, right? Is the problem of the auto-regulation. But as I mentioned in the article that is published in the Journal of Democracy, right? I think that it's important that political parties restrain themselves and show that they can be properly transparent, right? Especially nowadays with the use of new technologies, it would be so easy, if they would have the will. The problem is that they don't have the will. The question is to really convince them and to show them that this is very important. As we know, for example, one of the main Trojan horses of populist parties is this idea of the corrupt elites, of the corrupt political parties. And public finance certainly can help to increase transparency, because public finance is much easier to control than private money. So in this sense, I think that making specific nuances always, it would be, I don't know if easy, but at least, very, responsible, to, or how can I say, more fair to convince, political parties of the importance of this, of this measure. And I think, voters would certainly understand, if political parties manage to restrain themselves in the use of public funds. even if they get a lot of money, if people know how they are using their taxes, the response, I think, will be, very positive. The important thing is not how much, but especially how they are using this money.
Let me just say, I think Fernando gave two really great answers to my question or questions, and his article is now, it's open access for a while on the Journal of Democracy website. So I encourage everyone to read it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the excellent ideas. Always, it's been our pleasure to learn about ourselves from the outside. The funding is something between state and party. Like it's a the flat where the parties or state or public have to fight against the party. They are the controlling the funding channels or the ways. But the same is here in Mongolia. Okay, so thank you, Fernando. It's already the time for next presentation. And the next is Dr. Ingtsik from the Open Society for Foundations. I'm sorry, Open Society Foundations. And the presentation topic is election campaign financing in Mongolia in the case of the recent parliamentary election 2020. So you have 15 minutes for presenting and the following 8 minutes for question and answers. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Fernando. Your presentation actually provides a very nice segue to what I'm going to discuss here in my presentation. And I realize it's very late in Nottingham. So it's okay if you live in the middle, but thank you for your continued interest in Mongolia. International Idea and Open Society Forum first brought you to Mongolia a few years ago, and you've been interested in Mongolia ever since, and have been written a lot of actually articles that will certainly help us navigate through this muddy waters of political finance as we debate on new law, hopefully this year. And MP Muhtsi, also thank you that you are committed to receiving support from academics and researchers to draft a law. So my presentation today actually focuses on just one portion of this bigger picture, political finance. Mine is mostly focusing on election finance in Mongolia. But these two things are very hard to separate, actually. It's like two sides of the coin. So yesterday, when we were all here discussing about democracy, Transparency International released its 2020 CPI, Corruption Perception Index, and Mongolia backslided by 6 places on this index. And I haven't really looked closely into their methodology and why that's so, because the number we received last year is 35. And this year also the number remains the same, but somehow we backslided. But curiously, it corresponds to some of the domestic studies we do annually on corruption perception, namely the Independent Agency Against Corruption, for instance, has this study on prevalence of political corruption in Mongolia. So the latest study they released in September last year is on 2019. And if you see that, it actually corresponds to CPI index in that. So in the Anti-Corruption Agency index, the score is actually, I have to remove this. Score is worse if it goes up to 5. So it's on a scale of 1 to 5, and 1 being the worst. And they also rank institutions in terms of corruption. And as Fernando mentioned, political parties in a lot of countries are perceived to be very, very corrupt. And in Mongolia's case, political parties have been placed at the 2nd place for 2 years in a row. So there is a lot of problem with, of course, political money and election finance. And Mongolia, of course, it's not unique to Mongolia. In the region, also globally, we see a lot of political money scandals. If you look at the region, the most recent probably case on everybody can remember is probably South Korea. Yesterday, we heard from someone in Korea. In 2016, I think it involved the very first democratically elected female president of South Korea. Unfortunately, it led to her impeachment and imprisonment. In Mongolia, we have also had our share of political money scandals. Yesterday, someone mentioned about that leaked tape that came out just before the 2016 parliamentary election, where incumbent party senior politicians were discussing a fundraising strategy by selling government appointments to raise 60 billion tuberks. In 2020, we also had some political money related scandals, namely the government fund, the small and medium enterprises, the soft loan fund, and how politicians use their power to secure loans worth billions of tuberks from this fund, etc. In 2017, so if you remember, like all the last elections, we had some kind of political money scandals. So what's really clear is that funding is central question in party politics, and parties and politicians face enormous challenges to raise enough money to fund their participation in politics and also run and operate their political party organizations in Mongolia. And I would say that the origin of the problem goes back to in the 1990s, in the early days of establishing the multi-party system in Mongolia. Specifically, I want to mention the first political party law that was adopted almost 2 years before Mongolia adopted its first democratic constitution in 1990, actually, the first political party law. The goal of that law was to facilitate Mongolia's transition from one-party rule to multi-party system. So in doing so, political parties are set up to be completely self-financing institutions. That's to say they completely cut off all kinds of public support. So there has been almost zero public funding to political parties. In a way, the political parties are under this law, and the law that was adopted later in 2005 set up to almost like for failure. So right now, currently we have two sources of two pieces of legislation on regulating, governing political finance and election finance in particular. One is law on political parties, and the other is election law. Election law changes before every election. So this one, I'm talking about basically parliamentary election law that was passed in 2019. So law on political parties was passed in 2005. So under these laws, the political parties are financed from these sources. But in terms of the, I don't have to mention like go through every one of them, I guess. But in terms of the oversight under the law, political party law, oversight is left to the discretion of political parties themselves. So what we see around election time is political parties' donations from private sources for up to a year before the election. So that's the only information we get from political parties. Other than that, membership dues, which are set by respective party rules, income, revenue from all these different sources, we never see these numbers coming out of political parties. So under the election law, candidates and parties can finance themselves from their own resources, and there's no cap on how much they can, limit on how much they can actually spend, which is a major loophole in the law right now. Parties, candidates can also receive party transfers, but it's very, very minimal, as you will see as we go forward in this, move forward in this presentation. And donations are also allowed. It's 5 million from private individuals and corporations up to 20 million. Under the election law, the oversight is exercised by the National Audit Office, but it's the National Audit Office has been in charge of this oversight since 2015, very reluctantly, I would say. And it's not until 2020 they adopted regulations and reporting templates. It's a very basic first instruments that facilitate, good disclosure when it comes to election plans. So that's to say that, like before that, we didn't really have even reporting templates for campaign finance money spent on elections. So that said, there's not very complete and reliable information on political finance. It's very scarce, but nevertheless, on election spending, we have some aggregate data, and based on that data, we can make some observations about how money affects the level playing field and political culture in Mongolia broadly. So as you can see, we've been spending a lot on elections, and the costs have increased over the years. 2020 recorded the highest amount at almost 77 billion. That's about 28 million US dollars, right? In Mongolia, yesterday someone mentioned we have a first past the post system. We use first past the post system. It's very candidate-centric system. So candidates' share in this cost is a lot higher than that of the parties. So this shows like how much the money has been increasing per voter. But the thing is, like in 2016, we saw a little bit deep in the spending, but that's I have to point out this is not a complete data, because like in 2016 we had little under 500 candidates running in this election, right, parliamentary election, but not all of them submitted their reports. More than 100 of them actually didn't submit their financial reports to the National Audit Office as required by the law. And this year we kind of see a similar picture with only about 600, out of 606, we only have like 469 people submitting their election finance reports to the National Audit Office. So it's far from complete, and there is not like effective sanctions to discourage this kind of behavior as well, which speaks of how weak the system of oversight is in Mongolia currently. So by far, the 2020 election was actually quite competitive. We had, as I mentioned, 606 candidates, highest number of candidates we've ever seen in parliamentary elections. As like in 2016, it was 500. And among the candidates, we had 121 independents running the election in June. So this is campaign finance by parties based on these numbers I just showed you. So as you can see how the level playing field is a myth in Mongolia. It's far from being balanced. It's very unbalanced. So the big red share goes to the incumbent party, Mongolian People's Party. The orange is Democratic Party. So you can see the main opposition party and the incumbent party have the high share of costs in this picture. And then we have the Mongolian People's Party and the new party, and 2 billion is the Labor Party, the Hung electorate expenses. So these are so where is this money come from? It offers you but also some, I guess, an idea. I don't know how precise this, because I'll give you the reasons later, because we can't really rely on this official data, but nevertheless, I think it gives you an impression of where the money is coming from to fund elections in Mongolia. So most of the money is come from individual donations. In 2020, actually, we are seeing more and more attempts to raise funds from individuals as opposed to corporations, and that's a good thing. But you know, like under the election law, candidates only have about a month to set up this special account, and they have to raise money and spend from that account within that month, which is almost like an inbuilt incentive for discouraging candidates to raise money in you know, legal way. So that's why I'm saying that, you know, given the sheer amount of money raised within that 1 month, can we really trust that all the parties and the candidates are raising that money in a legitimate way? So that's an interesting question. So this is just the election spending of MPs. And here I would like to just highlight the fact that, you know, we have a few numbers here that might be interesting for you to hear. The combined total of campaign expenses of winning candidates or those who won seats in the current parliament equals 27.3 billion or 364 million Mongolian turbans per seat. And compare that to 55 million average spent by independents, or 130 million spent by each candidate in this election. So you can see how high the amount is compared to the average spending per candidate. And it also speaks to how unbalanced the level playing field if you look at the spending. Oh, here is it. And some of the interesting facts, 36 candidates reported zero campaign expense. From
I have 1 minute.
Name and shame. Oh, I'm running out of time. So this is from the Demos party. And we had an NGO doing campaign finance monitoring in the June election, and they reported that at least some of the candidates who ran on the who were nominated by this party had posters and, you know, campaign materials out in the streets, and we have documented that. But the thing is that the National Audit Office never cross-checks this information, which is to say, even if they underreported their expenses or filed you know, erroneous reports there, they would probably likely to go without any sanctions applied to them. And also, the things we don't see in these reports is money raised by parties before elections. So famously for Mongolia, and Fernando also mentioned this, the money, one of them is the pledge money. And this year, the pledge money, the Democratic Party set the pledge money at 100 million towards, and it has been also increasing. And what the consequence of this is that, first of all, it never appears in official reports, and second of all, it cuts out candidates that are otherwise qualified to run for parliament. But it's also a strategy that parties, I guess, had to adopt to, you know, basically it's seeking out rich candidates who can finance their own campaigns and also contribute toward costs of the political parties running an election. So it's also a strategy, fundraising strategy adopted by political parties in Mongolia in the absence of other alternative sources of funding, namely public funding, which is only available to in very scarce amounts to parliamentary parties, not extra parliamentary parties, right? And vote buying is also a huge problem, and we don't like, it's illegal under the election law, but we see it in every election. And in this year, for instance, somebody had brought 300 motorcycles to his district, and that came out on social media. And last year, the National University hosted this nice exhibition, Gifts from Politicians exhibition. It's also vote buying, and every major party is engaged in this behavior, but although it's illegal, it has yet to stop. And also abuse of state resources. So in cutting the public funding to political parties, the abuse of state resources was not actually made illegal until 2004. And the reason why it was made illegal was that NGOs really pressured the government. So now these days, it's more sophisticated and harder to detect, because especially for the incumbent party, using budget resources to finance the populist policies just prior to election has become a common thing. In 2017, if you remember, although it's illegal to promise cash, the president's flagship campaign promise was canceling all pension-backed loans for elderly Mongolians. And similar things happened in 2020 election, especially with regard to the child money. Child money, if you remember, was a Democratic Party campaign promise in 2004. NPP counteracted that promise by offering give 500,000 turks to every newly married couple, etc. So in 2002, suddenly the child money was increased from 20,000 to a monthly payment of 100,000. So the difficult thing is here is that it's hard to differentiate whether it's legitimate use of state resources for government purposes, or it's actually using state resources for campaign purposes. So this line is becoming blurry, which is really, really worrying. But I would say that the vote buying and abuse of state resources is also very symptomatic of the larger problem we have in politics in Mongolia, which is the clientelism, the patron-client relationship that political parties maintain with voters in Mongolia. So we see very limited policy discussions when elections roll around, but instead we see all these problems related to money in politics. So I'll stop here and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ertzek. So time is 5 minutes already over. So, but anyway, we can receive our questions from the floor. So if you have one, please raise your hand. Okay, so Professor Julian Dirkes from the University of British Columbia.
Thank you very much. That's a terrific presentation. Thank you so much for that. It's good to see sort of empirical detail on this. Larry Diamond asked in the some moments ago, is party stability a good thing? And it makes me think about, the pie chart you showed of how much bigger the resources for the DP and MPP are. Now, one argument would be to say voters support them, and so they should have more money. And that's a fairly straightforward argument. But you sort of implied that you see this disparity in financing as a bad thing. And so should there be more funding for new or smaller parties? What's your thinking there?
I'm actually skeptical about the way these funds are raised. I mentioned that although most of the money has come from individuals, candidates basically have just 1 month to raise money. And it's, I think to me, it's impossible to raise that kind of money within that 1 month, because the candidates have to do their own campaigning. And what kind of time would they have on their hands to raise that kind of money, right? So that, raises a lot of questions. So that's why I'm quite skeptical, especially when it comes to the ruling party and the main opposition party, because I don't think, just frankly saying that, speaking, I don't think that money is coming from legitimate sources. So that's why. And that said, for smaller parties, especially if public funding is not available. So public funding under the political party law is only available to those parties with representation in the parliament. So that further actually exacerbates the problem of unbalanced playing field in Mongolia. So we really need to fix that problem. And along with that problem, we also need to fix, the problem I mentioned with regard to the law and election in terms of giving them legitimate ways to raise funding from their support base. And yeah.
So, and any more?
I would be happy to ask more, but I don't want to. I don't want to monopolize the questions. But maybe I'll just ask one more real quick. I mean, you mentioned vote buying, but you showed these figures. I mean, that's stunning amounts of money. Where does all this money go? And I'd be interested, particularly in. I mean, some of the, at least for 2020, obviously there was very little in-person campaigning. So these are not sort of campaign events. And obviously from previous elections, the concerts and the doctors and all that have been banned. So is this all media purchasing, media time, TV, radio time, or is a lot of it going to staffing infrastructure, all these volunteers that get hired, lots of university students and like, do you have any sense of what sort of the share of the legitimate expenses are?
Yeah, to save time here, I didn't actually show you that data, but most of the money is going to campaign offices. So you're right, all those students. And the second biggest expense category is media. Yeah. But of course, there are many hidden costs like the vote buying, etc. Like I believe 300 motorcycles would have cost a fair amount of money, right? But that never shows up in the reports we see. And the reports only come out, the reports that come out only give us like aggregate numbers. So we don't actually see the breakdown of numbers. So for NGOs working on campaign finance oversight and monitoring, it's very hard to actually do our work properly. And access the information is really, really hard. It takes multiple letters to officials, and sometimes even after that, we get denied access to information.
Thank you. So, question from the Mark Koenig from the US Foundation.
Thank you. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Really great start to the day, I think. And I really like this theme of the 1 month campaign being a, maybe well-intentioned, but, with a lot of negative externalities kinds of policies. I think we can uncover a lot of them. I had a specific question about real estate, which was on part of your list of potential sources of income. And I think it may dig into kind of, again, why so challenging for newer parties to break in. But there is a pretty big question about the number of places that are controlled. And I guess the question that I had that links to that, within the party transfer category, are there specific rules about how money is supposed to be moved within parties and from parties to candidates? So when those transfer happen, we know anecdotally that cash is a common.
Well, if you the candidates like share of party transfers in their overall income is actually very minimal. It was like less than 30 million. So that's very minimal. And it's understandable because it's the candidates who finance their parties, not vice versa, right? So when it comes to real estate, I guess Gültat would mention this in his presentation. There's only one party who owns asset, and everybody knows who it is. And when we debated on new political party laws in the past, the draft laws in the past, the controversial issue was like whether political parties should be permitted to own real estate, right? And that was a breaking point. And Gültat, hopefully you will actually elaborate on that because you were very much in that part of the discussion. So those are the things we see currently happening in Mongolian politics in terms of money. And the incumbent party has a huge advantage over all the other parties for all these reasons.
Thank you. So time is over for this presentation, and thank you, Dr. Engstedt, for your interesting research on the recent the surveys on this issue. So next presentation we have as Professor Gültat from the Mongolian National University of Education, and his presentation topic is historical or chronological analysis on election systems from 1992 to 2020, and recommendations for Mongolian election systems. So you have 15 minutes and following 8 minutes for discussion. So mic is yours.
Okay, my presentation. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Especially, I would like thanks organizers and the distinguished presenters, also everyone. Today, I will introduce historical and chronological analysis on electoral system and maybe better recommendation for Mongolian electoral system. We know before 30 years ago, we transferred to democratic system. It is an open system to support the human right and based on multi-party democracy. My presentation objective is to examine electoral system changes of the Parliament of Mongolia since 1992, and also to analyze the result of the parliament election, such as the voter participation and the representation, and also election finance. Previous presenters mentioned this issue. Thank you, Inge and Fernando. It is very important because main influence to political party and the party system. Therefore, I examine the impact on the electoral system changes on the parties and the party system in Mongolia. Also to develop a recommendation on a better election system of a Mongolian political party system and the democracy. We know we have a lot of open data and also much more laws on a parliamentary election, and some scholars, foreign and domestic scholars, recommended some electoral system for Mongolia. Therefore, I would like use a method on the comparative analysis and the political system analysis. This is the change of the laws on parliamentary election and the electoral system. In the past 30 years, we used 5 electoral law on the parliamentary election, and also some amendments to change the electoral system. Totally, we used always changing electoral system before parliamentary election. And yesterday, Professor Julian Derkis mentioned about it to keep electoral system. It is a big issue in Mongolia. We have used the 4 kind of electoral system, 3 kind of electoral system, and this is black is a block voting system. It is a very negative impacts to political parties and the party system. And the forced electoral, it was a forced electoral system. We used it in 1992 and also 2018, and the last one is to 2020. It is a very negative to political party and the block vote. Also, we have this blue is first fast system. This is also included in a majority electoral system. We use it 4 times in 1996, 2000, 2004, and 2016. We have only one time a mixed parallel system. It is only acted in 2011, and we conducted by the electoral system in 2012 year. Maybe I think it is better for Mongolia, but we couldn't enough calculation. Therefore, I think Mongolian political system has many implicit reasons. The main reason is only electoral system, because the electoral system is implemented political system. The next slide is showing a number of voters and the turnout. We can see always increasing number of voters and declining turnouts. It's very important because Mongolian government created a voter registration system. The system is based on the civil registry, and the different countries use another method. I think we need to change a reform. It is also relevant also electoral system. In the last year, 2020, we still don't know about the number of voters because government responsible organization didn't announce the number. Also, second slide, second issue is legitimacy of the parliament. We can show votes received the parliament. It is still declining. And also, many voters' trust in the political parties also declining. The majority of voters' votes have remained outside the parliament. It's very important because also influenced by the electoral system. We always use it majority and the plurality electoral system. And the next issue is voters' support and the seat in the parliament. Yesterday mentioned Professor Bomdar and Batamdash and this issue. And we can see a gap of the seats from her slide. And I think Mongolian People's Party always dominated in the Mongolian politics. And this system is implicit sometimes supermajority supporting the parliament. It's a very important issue. From the slide, we can see 4 times polarized to support the Mongolian People's Party. It's very important, I think. And also real ratings of the political parties, we can see all result from the parliament. It's very important. Also, MPP is still declining. And according to the result of the 2020 parliamentary election, voter support for MP and the DP decreased by average of 21%. I think but is a block vote system determined who win. The PP received 30% from more support from DP in 1992 and other winner years. DP received maybe declining from this slide because I can see this is couldn't compete with the ruling MPP. Also, we can see toward the space of the space of the third parties were been increased in the last 2000, 2012, and 2002. It's very important to conclude. Next slide is the expenses of the parliamentary election, and also shown by Ms. Inke. It's very important. Why I selected this expenses is very important to maturation of the political parties and also institutionalization. Always political parties finance increasing, but finance of political parties is not transparent still here. Political party law was regulated this issue, but all political parties couldn't follow the issue. Only national Labour National Party announced it the last 3 years audited party financing. And we can see election expenses continuously increased since 1992, and parties and candidates use vote by illegal money. Everybody know this issue, but we couldn't still regulate this issue. And also information on election expenses has been inaccurate and a secret parliament election. Some political parties and candidates didn't report their expenses to National Audit Organization. I can see block vote system increases electoral expenses. This is a red column. The amount of money spent by political parties and candidates determine election results. Political parties and candidates spend a lot of money during non-election years. It's very important because also it is related by majority electoral system. Especially, I will mention in last parliamentary election, and this elected 75 members of the parliament spend 3.6 times more money than other candidates. It's a big problem on the majority system. And also we can see which party is ruling in Mongolia, and also how to define a party system in Mongolia. From here, the majority electoral system in Mongolia is the only MPP won in 1992, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2016, and 2020. Maybe I think MPP only dominated in Mongolian politics in the parliament. It is a little bit implicit negative impact to democracy in the future. And also DP has never won alone. If we can see in the result of the parliament, and the political party only created a national big coalition, especially Democratic Union coalition won in 1996, and also Motherland Democracy Coalition won in 2004. But after the election 1 year, the coalition disbanded during the presidential election 2004. And Mongolian political system has a MPP-dominated party system. According to Duverger's law, the majority system leads to two-party system. However, majority system majority electoral system of Mongolia two-party system has not formed due to weak institutionalization of the political party. Some foreign scholars already talk about this issue, especially Fernando Castelberto and Paul Mascarenhas. And my conclusion is when analyzing the changes of the electoral system, if we use the majority system in the future, voters will vote for the person, not policy. It is a big issue. In the case, candidate who invest the money, his and her own electoral district will still win. Money will still determine the result of the election. Also, voters by vote since 2004. So ruling political parties vote by the state resource and especially, I think, natural resource. It's maybe influenced to create a populism in Mongolia. Second one is parliament members always take a subsidy from the state budget in order to run voters. Furthermore, it is not possible to plan development policy around country and spend to countries' development. Also, registration of the voters who live abroad is still secret. They are not able to exercise their legitimacy right. Also, participation of total voters cannot increase because participation of young voters cannot increase, in my opinion. Money determines the winners of election, and the source of the funding is still not clear. Finally, I think one-party system dominates in Mongolia. In the world, in all the world, the other parties still remain outside the parliament and a very weak force for the political influence. As a result, party and the party system institutionalization will slow in the future. Therefore, I think we need to change electoral reform. But in my opinion, current political system is very difficult. The ruling parties never want to change electoral system. Other political parties and the voters outside of the parliament, they want to change electoral system. Therefore, I think we need to mix it a parallel system. It's a very important issue because it is helpful to change current political issue, especially support of the institutionalization, and also we need to be transparent. And the third one is provide the participation. And I think we need to 50-50 mixed parallel system is better for Mongolia, because we have little experience last 2014, but we couldn't enough calculation. Maybe currently many people supported this issue. We can see legal changes. It's very important. Also, I think it's important political party system next maturation in the institutionalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gilstad. So time is already over 5 minutes. So anyway, we have a question from the floor. Professor Diamond, raise your hand. So the mic is yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to say the obvious, but I won't simply repeat what I said yesterday. First of all, this is a very astute and helpful paper. I learned a lot from it, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in it. I can't stress enough how important I think it is for the future of Mongolian democracy that this problem of electoral system disproportionality be addressed. And again, it's not a partisan statement. It's just not a healthy thing for democracy to have such a shocking disproportionality of seats to votes. It's fundamentally unfair. It emboldens the ruling party to think it has a permanent mandate. It's not healthy for democracy. I think there'd probably be fairly wide consensus among the participants in this conference that something needs to be done. So I think the more interesting question is what and how. And I have a suggestion on the how and a suggestion on the what. On the what, I wonder, is there some magical reason why why Mongolia has to have only 76 members of parliament? One way to smooth or sweeten the path to the goal you're seeking, which is a more proportional electoral system, a half PR list and half single member district. And if you go that route, I would recommend the German system, where the vote for the party determines the overall share of the seats in parliament. I think I'm not saying it because there's a representative of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung here. I think Germany has the best electoral system generally for democracy. But it might sweeten the path for the politicians if you simply enlarged the parliament and added on, well, I don't know if you could get away with adding on 76 more seats, so you keep the existing districts and just that. But if you enlarge the parliament, more politicians will have an interest in it because there are more opportunities to get elected. And on the other side, and bridging back to our conversation yesterday, I'm wondering if you could organize a deliberative poll specifically on electoral system design, if you haven't already done so. Because when you explain it to voters, I think they're going to see that a mixed system is much fairer and more representative than what you have now, although they might not like the idea of adding more seats to parliament, because they might say, well, it's just creating more politicians and all the politicians are corrupt and rotten.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Would you have something reaction back to the Larry's word, Gilstad?
Of course, I was thinking about the size of the parliament. A few years ago, I was work at a little research. Also, some method we have Kubrick. Every scholar should know. Possible count is over 114 members in a parliament. Out of parliament is very possible, but Mongolian voters didn't support this issue because now decline in trust, voters' trust in parliament, also trust in political party, very decline in very bad situation currently. Therefore, I think it is not a good situation right now. Maybe, of course, all the scholars and some politicians talk about this issue in the future.
By the way, the same thing happened in Taiwan. They actually cut the parliament in half because they were mad at the politicians.
Okay.
Not good sign. Okay, so let me finish this presentation time. Thank you very much, Professor Gilstad. So let's move on to the next presenter's paper. So Professor Pavel Mashkarinek, are you here? Yeah, okay. So he's a Vice Dean for Science and Doctoral Studies, Faculty of Arts, Young Evangelista Purkini University. His paper topic is transformation of district level competition in Mongolian elections from 1992 to 2020. So you have 15 minutes, Professor, and I will remind you by the last 1 minute. Okay.
Okay. Hello to everyone. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
So, hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As it was mentioned in previous presentations, frequent changes is characteristic to Mongolian electoral system. At the same time, and contrary to many post-communist countries of, for instance, Central and Eastern Europe, which transitioned to democratic system with proportional systems at the national level, Mongolian voters chose their representatives through majority electoral systems. So, as Mongolia used in most elections single-member districts or small multi-member districts, my presentation will try to answer the question whether the electoral competition at the district level exhibits of two-party competition or indicates features of another type of party competition. So it's my research questions regarding the methods of my presentation. I take different approaches. First, I use Lark's target per effective number of parliamentary parties as a measure of parliamentary fragmentation, and then effective number of electoral parties calculated in each district as a measure of concentration in the distribution of votes across parties. Second, and more importantly, for my presentation, I use two graphic tools, concretely so-called Nagayama diagrams and simplex representations, whose main advantage of these methods is that they allow to present and compare visually, so more intuitively than the shape of district level electoral competition between the most successful parties and small parties. When I show in figure these methods in the Nagayama diagrams, top left figure, the horizontal axis shows the vote share of the largest party, and the vertical axis, the vote share of the second largest party. The Nagayama diagram is then possible to divide into 8 segments, reflecting the relative strengths of the first, second, and worst placed parties. Thus, while the districts in segments A, B, and C be taken to indicate bipolarized results, so two-party competition, the proportion of district in the segments F, G, and H indicates multi-party results. However, as Nagama diagrams displays the vote shares of the strongest parties in the district, regardless of their party affiliation, it fails to provide information about the district level competition between the two strongest parties nationally. In contrast, simplex representation in the bottom left figure uses triangular coordinates in a triangle to visualize the competitiveness of the national strongest parties at the district level, and by doing so, it's possible to assess to what extent those nationally strong parties are strong in the district as well, and so what extent district level competition is nationalized. So when I start my description of electoral competition at the national level, you can see in figure above, which characterizes Mongolian party competition since 1992 to 2020. You can see that electoral systems generally favored the largest parties, as evidence, for instance, highly disproportionate electoral outcomes measured, for instance, by Luzmov and Hebbi's distortion index or Gallagher index. Figure below then presents the percentage of the votes and seats received by the two strongest parties, and these results demonstrate the tendency to rise to party competition, which was interrupted only in 2012 elections, especially in proportion tier of mixed systems, which was used only in these elections. However, comparison of seats received by the two strongest parties suggested not classical two-party competition, as was mentioned also in a previous presentation, but suggested rather asymmetrical competition between the top two parties, as in half of elections, only one party, specifically Mongolian People's Party, received the vast majority of the seats. So the tendency to symmetrical two-party competition, which was strengthened by the establishment of the Democrat Party in 2000, almost disappeared in two last elections. When I present values of effective number of parties, they also use that tendency to asymmetrical competition is conferred by values of effective number of parliamentary parties, which is a brown line, which in these 4 elections oscillated between 1 and 1.5. On the other hand, values of effective number of electoral parties, which is a blue line, showed disruption of the bipolarization of Mongolian electoral competition, as value of effective number of election parties grew from about 2 to more than 3 between elections of 2004 and 2020. Now, in the next step, I try to demonstrate transformation of electoral competition using the segmented Nagayama diagrams for all Mongolian elections, and these figures generally shows less than uniform character of the electoral competition. For instance, the electoral competition under two-round system, especially in 1996 and 2000, was characterized by a mix of competitive or non-competitive two-party configurations. the results for the elections in 2000 as well as in 1996 show that most districts lie in the B, H, and A segments. More specifically, segment B, with the largest number of districts, almost half of them, is characterized by the two-party dominance. On the other hand, dissolution of the Democratic Alliance resulted in a considerable decline in two-party competition between the elections of 1996 and 2000, as share of the districts in segments of A and H, which contain areas with even stronger two-party dominance, decreased from 40% to only 20%. In contrast, there were less than 1/5 of multi-party constituencies, which are located in segment G. Finally, the third elections, which Mongolia used throughout system in 2004, witnessed partial return toward bipartisan, and at the same time, in 2004, these elections witnessed a stronger tendency toward bipartisan in all Mongolian elections, as overall most districts, more than 90%, were found in segments with no substantial third-party strand. When we move to another elections, especially 2000 elections, when Mongolia used mixed system, show that in these elections most districts signalized multi-party. However, what is most important is results of last two elections, which compared to 2012, result of the two last elections show partial return of prevailing two-party competition. It is as it shown Nagayama diagrams. All those segments which exhibited two-party competition, segments H, A, and B, included more than half of the district. However, for our analysis is more important using simplex representation, because Nagayama diagrams displays the vote share of the two strongest parties regardless of their party affiliation, and as such it fails to provide information about the district level competition between the strongest parties nationally. For that reason, I use simple representation. Here I opted to use vertices B and C to represent the two major parties. Vertex B on the left of the triangle represents Mongolian People's Party vote share, and the vertex C on the right of the triangle represented votes for the Democratic Party or its previous predecessors. Figures then show highly contrasting patterns of Mongolian electoral competition at the district level. For instance, the simplex representation for 1992 elections confirmed prevalence of and dominance of MPP in these elections. There are only very few districts with two-party competition between the two strongest parties nationally in that time, but although there were almost districts with balanced three-party competition. Thus, electoral competition in 1992 took place between MPP, the only strong party nationally at the time, and all other parties. In contrast, in 1996, the electoral competition in large part of the districts was characterized by more or less perfect competition between two major parties, as most of the points which you can see are not close to either of the two vertices of the triangle, which represents the strongest parties. Vertices B and C. This results confirms the prevalent competitiveness of electoral competition between MPP and Democratic Alliance. Finally, a large part of the single-member districts, which is located under the horizontal line in the bottom part of the triangle, indicates weak presence of districts with multi-party competition.
You have 1 minute.
Okay. I moved to last two elections, which is, according to me, very important. Also, when I summarize results for last two elections, so the simple representation for 2016 election shows some four trends. First, high number of districts with asymmetrical bipartisan with clear advantage of the MPP over the Democratic Party, as most of the points was located in the left trapezoid, which represent the MPP's dominance. Second, we can see an extremely limited number of districts with clear dominance of the strongest parties nationally, as demonstrated by the scarcity of points on the triangle's horizontal edge, especially compared, for instance, to 2004 elections. Second, furthermore, the record number of single-member districts with balanced three-party competition by the interior triangle of the simplex representation. And finally, high number of single-member districts with strong third-place parties, or where the competition took place between one of the nation's main parties and some other party. This was a rule as a competition between the MPP and some other party, and very similar competition that we can see in last election. So, two conclusions. The main aim of my presentation was to answer the question whether the electoral competition at the district level exhibits features of two-party competition. In this context, both graphic tools resulted in partly different pictures of district level competition, while the Nagiamadi visualization suggested prevailing two-party competition. The simplex visualization showed partly different picture. Because relatively symmetrical competition existed only in elections in 1996, 2004, and partly 2008. In contrast, in remaining elections, competition was significantly asymmetrical, with Democratic Party falling behind. More importantly, in some elections in Kulik, especially last two elections, the electoral competition in a number of districts didn't take place between and DP as the system means parties, but between MPP and some other party. As this happened for the second time in a row, Mongolian party system was not possible at the district level, regarded as a two-party system, because repeated loss of the Democratic Party cast doubt on its position as the credible government alternative to the MPP. Overall, if this trend continues, it may result in a transformation of the Mongolian party system to, for instance, some form of predominant party system which existed, for instance, in Japan. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Mashkerinik. So it's a question and answer time. Okay, Dashka, raise your hand.
I was just clapping my hands.
I see. Okay. So, any question from the floor? If you have one, please raise your hand or Okay, Professor Mungsa from the School of Law of the National University of Mongolia.
Hello, everyone. As a law professor, I would like to add some comments concerning the election system and the political parties in Mongolia. What Professor Gilstad and others presented is the result of the poor judgments of the Constitutional Court of Mongolia for last 29 years. In 1993, the Constitutional Court announced that the Mongolian Constitution does not protect equal suffrage. And it was an unreasonable judgment. And since then, the court has issued other judgments following this bad precedent. So as a scholar, we always criticize this judgment, but the court has not changed this judgment. And this is resulted the disproportional distribution of seats of the parliament between the urban and rural areas in Mongolia. Another judgment was issued just before the 2016 election of the parliament. As you know, we had a much better system which was used in 2012. And just before the parliamentary election in 2016, the Constitutional Court announced the judgment that the proportional element in the election system violated the direct suffrage principle in the Constitution, which is almost crazy, because no one could reasonably say that a proportional system violates direct suffrage. And just after the judgment, I wrote a long paper, but it was late, and the majority in the parliament, the Democratic Party with the Mongolian People's Party happily accepted the court judgment. We had the second step. If the majority rejected the court judgment, the court had to announce the final judgment. But the parliament received the first conclusion of the Constitutional Court. So what I want to say is we cannot improve the political system unless make the Constitutional Court more professional and independent. This is my doctoral dissertation, and the Constitutional Court is packed with the politicians who are not lawyers, who have no legal education, and most judges in the Constitutional Court are the politicians or the close friends with the politicians. And the judges of the Constitutional Court can be re-elected many times. So, for example, one judge was re-selected for 6 years 4 times. So Justice Johnson was in the Constitutional Court for 25 years. They were all the judges. So if the judges at the Constitutional Court are obedient with the ruling party, they are re-elected. And then in the last year, we tried to fix it in the constitutional amendments to make the term of the Constitutional Court non-renewable long-term, 9 years, and they make the composition of the court more professional, required with at least 10 years professional experience. But as you may know, the current president was blocked every good clauses related to the judiciary. And then we had the 9 clauses in the draft amendments, and we lost 7 of them due to the pressure from the president Batuluk. And then, yeah, this is what we have now. And then the increase of the members of the parliament is also very important. We have been writing papers about this issue, and we try to increase the number of the MPs in the draft constitutional amendments, but this failed because during the deliberative polling, this issue was not inserted into the polling. Because the subjects in the deliberative polling was only whether we should have unicameral parliament or bicameral parliament. There was no question related to the increase of the MPs in the unicameral parliament. So we could not have had this subject discussed in the deliberative polling in 2017. So the Mongolian constitution says that the parliament should have 76 MPs. So this is the constitutional issue, but the ordinary citizens don't like the increase of the MPs. So this is the constitutional, political, and judicial issues that created this current system. And luckily, we had the very good clauses in the constitution now, which were inserted by the 2019 constitutional amendments. For example, the Article 19 of the constitution requires now that the political parties parties structure must be consistent with the democratic principles. So following these principles, we have to reform the political parties to make more democratic in the internal structures. In addition, the amendment said that required that the political parties has the duty to keep their asset, income source, expenditure transparent. So this is the constitutional requirement. I think this is very important requirement. The third important clause is that the amendments requires the public funding of the political parties. So if we use these constitutional requirements and principles inserted by the amendments last year, we can have a very good law on the political party. The conception of these clauses were very clear, so that these principles should be explicitly inserted into statutes and make the political party more democratic and its expenditure more transparent. So I hope that we law professors with the political scientists can draft a good law on the political party this year, and then we try to get help from MPs, especially Professor Mungchitsu, who is now in the parliament. She is the political scientist, so I think she would be very helpful to have this law passed by the parliament. Thank you. This is my comment, and yeah.
Thank you for your detailed sharing of your opinion. And as you know, he's also one of the working team members for the how to say preparation for draft for the amendment of the Constitution. So he's a specialist on this issue. So any question from the floor? Okay, if you have not, so let me close this panel. Before the close, I would just say thank to all of the presentations. We have 4 great presentations on the electoral system and the funding issues of Mongolian politics, especially election campaign and parties, and its the impacts, good and bad impacts on Mongolian democracy. And all presenters are the specialists on those issues. I would just remind you Dr. Fernando Casal-Birtois and Dr. Ingtug, the Professor Giltad, and the Professor Paul Mashkirin. So thank you all for your presenting, and also thanks to Flor for comments and questions. So let me close this panel. Thank you very much.